done judging, so you're good. Okay, with that, it is 6 o'clock. We'll call our meeting to order. And the first order of business is a roll call. Sarah, would you like to please take the roll?
Yes, thank you. Mayor Mapes?
Present in Alma, Michigan.
Vice Mayor Harrington?
Present in Alma, Michigan.
Commissioner Allman?
Present in Alma, Michigan.
Commissioner Pickle?
Present in Storm Lake, Iowa.
Commissioner Pitts?
Present in Alma, Michigan.
Commissioner Stahl?
Present in Alma, Michigan.
And Commissioner Warnick?
Present in Alma, Michigan.
Out for June 2020 to you. So I thought we'd start off going through some of the financial piece of this, and then we'll switch over and talk about some of the internal control issues and findings that we've had this year. So to get us started, we actually did issue what's called an unmodified or clean audit opinion. This is just on the financial statements themselves, and basically it means that we believe the numbers that are presented within the report are presented fairly when we take materiality into consideration. So despite all of the challenges in getting the audit completed, you did end up with that unmodified opinion, which is what you would want to receive. We'll talk about some of the general fund numbers, as that's generally what people focus on the most. Here you can see a breakdown year over year, FY19 versus 20 for your revenues. For 2020, revenues came in at roughly 3.9 million. You'll see that areas such as taxes, charges for services, and then kind of your other miscellaneous revenues, those all were relatively consistent year over year. The category that changed the most is going to be the intergovernmental revenues. And you'll see that that decreased from 2019. The reason for the majority of that decrease is a timing issue, in that there were funds that were received by the city that typically could be recorded in fiscal year 20, but weren't because they weren't collected within 60 days. So some issues getting deposits in, issues requesting money and getting it timely caused this discrepancy here. So amounts are booked as accounts receivable at the end of 2020, and once they were collected in 2021, they become revenue for your fiscal year 2021. So I would anticipate then that we would see the reverse happen next year. Your intergovernmental revenues should look higher than what they normally do because of that timing difference. On the expenditure side then, general fund had roughly 4.6 million in total expenditures. Here you can see the most significant categories where funds are spent. Some were up, some were down, just kind of depended on some circumstances. Community safety, you'll see increased from 2019. The majority of that increase is going to be related to wages and then any applicable benefits. And then you'll notice the fourth category over is executive administration, and that increased pretty significantly year over year. That's where the $250,000 MERS payment is recorded, and that was a payment in excess of your normal contributions that you would make. So that's where you can see that amount reflected. And then fiscal services is the other category that had a pretty significant increase. This is because in prior years, the finance department, the majority of those costs were actually recorded in the internal service fund. And this year is when the finance department took those costs out of the internal service fund and put those into general fund. So that is the increase there. Here you can see your general fund balance. 2019 had ended with about 3.6 million. This year fund balance decreased roughly 745,000. So you have about 2.8 million in fund balance at the end of 2020. Of that decrease, there's about 400,000 or so that's going to be a timing difference that, should all those receivable amounts be collected, will reverse and help increase that fund balance back up. So overall, though, even with the decrease this year, there is still a pretty healthy fund balance sitting there. You can see you had increased every year since 2016. So this was the only year that showed a decrease. And we would have expected potentially a decrease anyways, with choosing to make that additional contribution to MERS as well. All right, we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about a couple of the enterprise funds. So the first one here is the wastewater utility fund. We present for you the net position and the cash and investment balances. So you'll see the net position, also known as fund balance, if you're more used to that term, came in at over $7 million this year, and that has been steadily increasing. So that's a positive in that fund. And then whenever net position is increasing, we always like to look also to see if it's cash that's causing that increase, or if it's just increases in capital expenditures that are capitalized. So here you can see that also for the same time period, cash and investments has been increasing as well and came in at just over $2 million for this fiscal year.
So just to clarify, that net position includes the property, plant, and equipment. Is that true?
Yep. So that would be all of your assets less all of your liabilities. So it would include those capital assets, and then any debt that's outstanding to pay for those assets gets subtracted as well.
And those are depreciated values?
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. All right, the next fund then is the water utility fund. So this has had a little bit different activity. You'll see between 16 and 17, activity, both cash and net position, had increased a little, and then we saw a decrease. That decreasing situation is the result of moving the equity interest in the Gratiot Area Water Authority. So previously, whatever interest there was in the authority was adjusted annually. And after reviewing some of the GASB statements that had come out and also taking a look at the actual agreement with the water authority, it was determined that that no longer should be recorded within the water utility fund. So that's why you see kind of that dip down there in 2018. You'll see for 2019 to 2020, then net position really held pretty much the same. Not a significant change there. You're just under $6 million in total net position. And then the cash side of it did decrease from 2019 to 2020. But there were some capital expenditures that were made in 2020. And so that's going to cause your cash to decrease. Here's a look at kind of your long-term obligations. This combines anything you would have had as a governmental type activity, a business type activity, or anything in a component unit. So this is really taking all of the debt associated with the city. So you can see the bond and note category has been steadily decreasing. You have just about $6 million in total bonds and notes payable outstanding. And then compensated absences, which is the least of your long-term liabilities, really has pretty minimal changes from year to year. Nothing too significant to note there. And then the final one is going to be your net pension liability. And you can see this is kind of all over the place, which is pretty typical with these net pension liabilities. What gets reported really depends on what the market was like at the end of the valuation period, and also what assumptions are used when the actuary calculates the values. So in some of these years, there were some assumption changes, which changes the liability piece. And then for some of the years, so for 2018, the value used for the market was down at that time, which causes a decrease in the asset value. Switching gears a little bit, I think probably the most important discussion that we can have is related to the internal control environment at the city. We had basically the same conversation when I presented last year's audit. However, this year's audit was what I would consider significantly more challenging than any of the previous audits for the city. It was very challenging to get the right information and the right numbers to get the audit completed. So you can see here we had several material weaknesses that we identified. The first one being related just to the overall control environment and everything that goes into producing financial information. Basically, we feel like the people in place do not have either the right skill set or are not in the right positions. I know the finance director that was working with us at the audit is no longer there. So I think that's a positive move for the city. We did have over 50 audit adjustments, which is very significant. We basically touched maybe every single fund. Don't quote me on that, but almost every fund and every type of account, balance sheet, income statement, all of them were requiring adjustment at some level. Another piece of this, which we talked about again last year, was bank reconciliations. So the reconciliations are being done or being worked on, but there are still variances that were not completely reconciled. So at the end of 2020 fiscal year, there was still $47,000 in the pooled checking account that was unreconciled. So they couldn't tell us what accounted for those differences. Fortunately, the $47,000 isn't material, so we can still say
was that carried over from a previous year then?
That was.
That full amount?
Yep, the amount actually changed though. I think that it increased from the previous year, what the variance was. So I think it was maybe 37,000 right in there the previous year, and the difference actually increased this year.
Thank you.
So definitely that's an area that really, I mean, cash is cash and it should reconcile. And if it's not, then probably you need to seek some other resources to help you get that reconciled. It's a lot easier for fraud to happen in an organization if you don't have bank recs that reconcile and if you don't have people reviewing and approving those bank reconciliations. So it's a really important piece. The third item relates to the federal awards. This is a carryover finding for several years. If you're receiving federal dollars, you're required to have written federal award procedures. So at some point, this would be something good to focus on. I think if I were going to prioritize some things, I think you have probably some other areas that need to be tightened up first and work on this maybe after doing some other cleanup. The fourth one is just related to the fact that the audit was not filed timely. The audit is due to the state by the end of December annually, and it was not submitted until well after that. So that's a non-compliance material weakness. The fifth one then is expenditures not being within authorized budget amounts. So there were three funds: the general fund, the major street fund, and the street improvement millage fund. that all had various expenditures that exceeded the budget amounts, and they were in excess of the budget by a material dollar amount. So those are required to be reported to the state. And then the last one on this.
Expand on that a little bit, Allie? Because, I mean, those are pretty major dollars if they're material in those funds.
Yep, they are. What I believe is that really when the budget amendments were done for the end of the fiscal year, I don't think a very good review of actual expenditures to that point had happened. And so the numbers that you were presented with to approve for the budget weren't good numbers. There were instances where expenditures had actually happened prior to, or at least the finance department would have knowledge of them happening when they did the budget amendments, but they just didn't factor them into the budget. And then other times there would be expenditures that occurred or invoices that came in after year end that had to get accrued back. And so in some cases that wasn't getting factored in either. So definitely an issue with it being material. We see at a lot of governments, there are times when there are over expenditures, but they're usually minor. Maybe there was a couple small invoices that came in or something that wasn't accounted for in the budget process, but typically we don't see material over expenditures. The last material weakness then relates to the property tax distributions. So governmental units are required to disperse taxes within a certain time frame, and then also to reconcile with the county annually. And it was very clear that it was kind of a haphazard process of getting the tax payments made out to entities and working with the county. So the time frame that is supposed to be followed was not followed, and it was an excessive number of days beyond when payments should have been made that they were made. And then when it came to reconciling with the county, that wasn't done. Well, actually, I don't think it was even finalized maybe until after the audit. But it was during the audit, sometime this winter, that we worked with the county to try to get some numbers to be able to report in your financial statements that they agreed with and that the finance department agreed with. So several areas there. Any questions from anyone or anything you want me to try to expand on for these? There is more information on all of them it'll be in the actual financial statement PDF that you have. It'll be towards the very back is where you'll find all of these findings and what we wrote regarding each of them. Okay, and then we're also required to just communicate different audit standard information to the city council. And so you would have also received not the financial statements, but another separate letter from us that had those required communications. Within it, you will find towards the back of that letter are the management comments. And you can see from this listing here that we did have several management comments also. So a management comment is where there's something that's not material or not to the level of being a significant deficiency, but something that we still feel is important enough to at least bring to your attention. Some of these aren't as significant as others. Some of them are carryover issues from prior years where things could stand to be cleaned up. So I'm not going to touch on all of them because you can read that letter for more information, but I thought I would touch on a few. The first one being the fourth bullet point down there in that list, the deficit unrestricted net position. Usually if there's a deficit, people like to talk about that and understand why. This is in the internal service fund. This was a deficit in prior years as well, and related to recording that net pension liability. And so as that liability decreases, some of this deficit should also go away as well. Should you choose to do away with the internal service fund where this deficit is, if you decide to combine more into your general fund, then at that point, the net pension liability related to this fund just becomes a governmental wide liability basically and is removed from this fund. So just want to bring it to your attention. Always with an internal service fund, you want to make sure that you're charging the other funds an adequate amount. But in this case, because it's caused by that net pension liability, it's something to watch, but understand how the net pension liability factors into that deficit. All right, a couple more down there, credit cards and unlawful expenditures. So we did some testing of the credit card transactions and found a few different situations. There were instances where there were charges on the statement that documentation could not be produced for the charges. So let's say someone goes out to a restaurant, they should have a receipt from that restaurant. It should be itemized so we can see what was purchased. And that should be accompanying the credit card statement as support. So we had some instances where no support could be obtained. There's also the fact that the policy in place is not really what's being practiced. So in practice, if people don't have a credit card or don't have a separate receipt to go with the credit card transaction, there was some affidavit apparently that could be filled out and approved for those type of transactions, but your policy doesn't actually say that that's an allowable practice. So if that's something you want to have continue, then the policy should be updated to reflect that. If that is something that's going to be used, then that affidavit should be approved by either the supervisor for that employee, or if it's a department head, then it could be the finance director. If it's the finance director filling it out, it should be the city manager. So as long as there's some extra layer of approval, that would be okay. And then the last piece of this is the fact that there were several purchases of food, whether it be food brought in, people going out to restaurants, that didn't appear to really have a business purpose. And also, you have to be really careful in purchasing food items if they are not also being provided to the public. So if you have a council meeting and you want to get donuts and the donuts are out and everybody at that meeting is welcome to them, that's an allowable expenditure. If you want to buy donuts and you're only going to let the mayor and the city manager eat them and nobody else, then that's a time where that would not be an allowable expenditure because it needs to be for public use.
Ellie,
Yeah.
how common is it for municipalities such as us, in your experience, to allow credit cards the way we've done this? And allowing, I believe all the department heads now have a card. Is that pretty common practice for municipalities of our size?
Yeah, I say unfortunately it is. There's so much fraud that can happen with credit cards. Some places have just chosen to really keep the credit cards tighter to the vest and not give them out to as many department heads or employees. But honestly, really, even with COVID, too, we're actually seeing more credit cards going out to more individuals. So if you're going to have all those people have credit cards, then you really have to make sure the internal controls around them are solid and that people are really watching those transactions.
Are you seeing
yeah.
similar issues in those programs that we're having here?
No, we test credit cards sometimes every year, some places, every few years, other places if they have lesser activity. But I'm really not. Once in a while, the biggest thing we get is people won't turn in their receipts. That seems to be the biggest issue. But we don't generally see inappropriate expenditures or unlawful expenditures on the cards. It's usually a matter of just not getting the receipts turned in.
Thank you.
All right. And then the last one I wanted to touch on is the billing to other entities. So the city bills out places such as Pine River and Arcata Township for utility type issues, and then also bills the Housing Commission for running payroll. And so the city ends up fronting the cash for a short period of time sometimes, which is okay, but other times it's an extended period of time where you're fronting the cash for these transactions until somebody catches that, hey, one of these other entities should have been billed. So within the monthly procedures, really should be good procedures and a process to make sure that the city is billing all of the entities that it's supposed to and for the right dollar amounts. Because you don't want those balances to get too large, and you don't want too much time to go by, because then there's a chance that those other entities might say, you know what, this wasn't really billed timely, we don't know what this was for, and we're not going to pay it. Especially if there's turnover at those other entities, if agreements were made that weren't in writing, which would be a problem too. But if agreements were made and not in writing, and then people are gone, then sometimes people forget that things are going to be paid for. So just another area to button up. I did want to say before I conclude what a tremendous help that Curtis was. I know he was very new when we started the audit, and he was thrown right into the fire. But we really appreciated everything that he did to try to get the audit done. He would actually respond to our emails. He would respond to them timely. If he did not know something, he admitted it very quickly, but then worked to try to find some type of resolution to get us what we needed. So I did want to put that thank you out there to him, because that was a really tough position for him to be in, and I think he deserves some credit for the work that he did do to make sure this audit could get done. And with that, I'd take any other questions.
It seems with the credit that you just gave Curtis, that was completely different than what you found with other staff members when you were seeking information and going through the audit.
That is
They were
true.
not responsive, and they were not admitting that they didn't know or didn't have information.
Correct. And I would primarily apply that statement to the previous finance director, because others within the finance department were helpful to the extent that they could be. But there was no one else.
With questions for Ellie? I suspect, Ellie, that we're probably going to digest this a little bit, and we'll have some questions before we're done here. So probably not tonight, maybe it doesn't look like, but I'm sure in the near future we're going to want to talk again.
Yep, absolutely. I'm happy to meet and discuss anytime.
Allie, I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work and bringing it to our attention. And I know that this committee will work to get it correct. You've told us the last couple years, but it's to the point where we have to buckle down even more. So thank you for your help on it.
Thanks, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else before we move on?
Just me. I just wanted to say thank you also, but I'm just a little overwhelmed. So like you said, Greg, I'm going to have to take some time to digest it. Will we be getting something that we can look at some point, or were we supposed to have gotten something? Because I haven't received any kind of a.
Now that she's presented, this will all come to you.
Okay, that's what I wondered. I feel like I got to look at it again. So
Yeah,
there's a lot to digest, but thank you, Allie, and thank you, Curtis, too, if he's on here. I'm not sure, but.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we're in this situation again, and thank you, Ellie. I can't imagine that this is a pleasant or agreeable situation for you to be in, and so my sincere apologies about that, and we'll hopefully get things buttoned up. Thank you.
I think it's just imperative at this point that we resolve this situation one way or another, I think, since I've been on the commission. And we just need to get this finished, just resolved completely now, as soon as we can.
Okay. So with that, Matt, you're up next.
Thank you. I
Thank
just
you, Ellie.
echo everybody with Allie. Your professionalism through all of this has been incredible to work with you, and as you and I have talked recently, and so that you know, everybody, I have a corrective action plan that's been written. That's why we have the policies. This is the number one priority at this point in time that we go through. So thank you, Allie. I'm gonna go ahead then and move into the next stage is where we're at. Some of this will be touched on, where I'm at right now in this. Let's see if I can get my screen up. Obviously not the way to go into this, but I think that one of the things that I've stressed since we've come to this point, and one of the things when we're talking about the budget, there was a lot of question is the timing of all of this. I think it's obvious what we just went through as to why the timing was what it was in order to do it, which creates another stressor at a budget time. But there really was no way for us to continue on down that path. So where we started to put this together, and I think that your input will be essential as we go forward here, because really this budget's intended to represent in the terms of what we want to do for the city. And I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't understand that this is how we provide to the citizens here in Alma. And so what I have put together here to start with is this starting July 1. I've met with the finance committee prior. I've met with the personnel committee, and it truly is this idea that Roger, you just said it. It's that position that says as of July 1. Prior to that, but July 1 is the date that's been put in the corrective action plan. July 1 is the dates that say this is where we have to move. So that's the idea that we have. We have reestablished our priorities, and I think more than ever now, this planning for the infrastructure needs. And as we move forward, when you look through the what's coming possibly, and some of the funding issues that we talk about when you talk about infrastructure, that we continue to plan for that. We've made a lot of technology changes. I think that will help us. We've all learned how to use technology differently as we sit here and run our meetings this way. The other idea was we maintain a safe community and in the work environment. We were making some changes here internally, plus continuing our job there. And then we just spent the last 40 minutes talking about being fiscally responsible in this changing environment and making that commitment to do that going forward. One of the issues that came up, and as we were just talking, because what we were just presented is not necessarily specifically related to any one item that we have. I think, as you can see, it's a systemic issue. Many of the items on there have been here for a while, some as long as 7 years. And the only way to control the situation is take responsibility and start to put those measures in place that will really start to change the things that we're looking at. And it has to be that commitment that's formulated to the real change as we go forward. So while specific policies and things may be needed to address some certain issues that we have, but the real problem again is systemic and it's all encompassing. And we've had some talks within those left here in the finance department as to what we're doing as to the commitment level of going forward so that we can have that success in moving on. The plan that I have written to the state to correct these things and what we started on, I have not received it back. It was only, it wasn't due in until later this month, but I got it in the other day. And the ways to look at these are, and probably number one, I think Allie mentioned it, it's really the restructuring of the department that has to happen at this point. Looking at our roles and looking at our positions within the department and then making decisions as to who should be doing what are the responsibilities. We're looking to restructure in a little different way of having that director treasurer, of which I've not put anybody in that position at this point. And the reason is I don't think it's time to fish in that pond, as opposed to it is to try to stabilize with what we have. And I would echo what Allie said. Curtis is the person who got us through this portion of it, and he's continuing to work on in this process. But part of the other issue is having, when we talk about having somebody to speak that language and to be in the accounting world, and really looking at someone in a financial analyst position that would also handle accounts payable and be that person to do that. And the job description has been written and everything that went through to the state with all the different things. The billing portion of which she mentioned some of the issues in billing really needs to be somebody in that accounting world again, because having those cross things and those things that can do the checks and balances that have not been here are automatic then when you have people who are qualified to do that. We're past the point now of saying that people haven't been trained. It's deeper than that. It's the issue of really making the decisions of the type of people we want in those positions. We now have 2 accountants on staff that we are working through a lot of things currently. Changing our whole cash receipting, of putting someone into that special position that will have much different duties, of which you saw that I've sent to you guys, and then having the cashier and the full and part-time positions so that there is some cross again there that we're cross training. Really, creation of the second one is the policy manual that really hits on those internal controls that Allie hammered away on that have to be there. And going through all of those parts of the process. And that's why it was important that I thought I brought that to you. That's been sent in also in order to, again, but the reality is we can have all the internal controls and policy if we don't follow up and train in it and then don't hold people accountable to it. And so, developing it and talking about the importance of training, the reality, it comes down to making those changes. And so that's really where we sit right now, is to finish our way through that. So I pledge everything that we have here. We're extremely short in there right now, but we'll start to move in the right direction. I think it's improved already, but there's an awful long way to go. And you can see all of the things that we have to continue to work through.
May I?
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Greg.
Yeah, a concern I have after what we've just been told by our auditor is, I guess, and you said right now you didn't want to fill the finance director position. And we've got all these challenges. It seems we've put some people in place. You've got a couple of talented accounting professionals in place to do some of the work, that understand the work that needs to be done. It leads me to believe what we really need with all the systemic issues we have is we need that higher level person that's overseeing these people, checking the box, making sure that the right duties are being done, the right priorities are put in place, leaving that to the clerks to, check their own work. I think that's part of the problem we've got or had in the past. We haven't had that person at a higher level that understands the system and can take a step back and look and see, make sure the clerks are doing it right, make sure all the I's are being dotted and the T's crossed. I'm very hesitant to leave that position vacant for very long. I think we need to get on that.
I'm not saying for very long. As I said, I think everything looks to me, but all this has to be in place, and what's written into the guidelines is it has to be in place by July 1st. It has to be in place. That's part of the plan that's been sent to the state, which obviously it's something we'll have to get started on rather quickly, even to have it in place by then. And so, yeah, I would agree. And I would think that would bring that back and start down that process. I just say right now, I haven't immediately put that out right now, until we've reached some of the stability point, which I think is really the level we're at right now. So I'm really,
and I gotta say, we had disappointment with our past director, our most immediate past directors, and in fact, our last several directors, to be honest about it. But I'm also disappointed in the consultant that we hired in the interim before we hired this last director, that, some of these doesn't seem like anything was corrected during that period.
there was a lot fixed from back there, but I do think that the processes, and it's not the place to have this discussion on the prior person here, but it's disappointing is more than the word. You're exactly right.
We paid a lot of money to that consulting firm for many, many months.
Yeah, as I get there.
I mean, just to emphasize Greg's point, historically, our issue has been the management.
Yeah.
It is sort of accountability. It's also kind of a leadership piece. What's the culture? What's the expectations? And that's on top of making sure all the knowledge is necessary, but it's not sufficient if it's not managed well. It just is not going to get us.
Is it possible to fix this for the time being by appointing an acting finance director treasurer for the next 6 months or whatever until we get some of this stabilized? I think to put a brand new director into a position and making that a permanent position, it could be a mistake right now. We don't know. To go through all of the hoops that we would have to go through to hire a new director. Could it be solved by putting an acting director in?
Roger, I think it depends on what we can find as far as personnel.
Yeah.
Matt, didn't you put Curtis as the interim finance?
He's interim at this point because if somebody's got to be in charge there with it. And I think that I would say that the change that's already occurred, and as Ali spoke, the knowledge base is more than proportional as to what we're getting now from that. He is showing quite the talent to find the problems and actually take care of the problem from there. But that's where I talk about.
If he has the title of interim, that's fine. I was just saying there needs to be, right now, there needs to be somebody on the top of the pile.
Yes, and that's and from the management standpoint of recreating the positions and doing the things, I feel at this point, from the management standpoint, I'm going to have to take a very, very active role in how we push these new positions across and how we restructure that department. That I would have to really take on a lot of that portion of the management as we continue to fix these things from there.
I have a question. When did this all start coming about, that you started seeing all this in the bad audit? When was it like your red flag went up? Was it just a couple months ago, or when you started? I'm not sure when you started. Is she still here? I can't see.
I don't think she is, because I think she had another engagement, Michelle.
Okay, so do you know when did we start knowing that it was bad? As bad as it is this year?
Oh, this year?
I mean, with this audit.
I think as the time we got late into the December where we were past the deadlines, that there was just that much going on from there.
Okay.
Actually, what would be useful to me is I tend to trust what somebody's telling me about the finances. They seem to know more.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like a qualified second opinion from time to time. Because we go along hearing information, and it could just be my limits. It sounds good to me. It makes sense. It sounds well justified, but I'm not a good qualified second opinion. And I wonder, instead of investing in, I mean, we need to invest in training, but rather than like we did with the firms, maybe an interim audit to say you're on track or you're not. That would give me more comfort, because I would like someone who is not, it's not that I don't trust them. I just think I don't know enough. I think an interim audit might be worth more than bringing in consultants and everyone else to tell us how it's done.
One of the things we talked about last night in the personnel committee meeting about this was the possibility of having an interim audit like in December or even earlier than that, to just see if we're on the right page.
As we said last night, I think that there's a cost to that, but I think in order, because Nick, your point to me is very well taken. For most of us, this financial world it's hard to know. And so unless you have that independent person coming from there, possibly would be something to look into. I'm more than willing to look at that.
And that's where, I guess I was going with a director that would tell us that, the bank accounts aren't being reconciled timely, and they're not being timely, and they're not complete. I thought we were told at various points in the last year that things were going well, that things were being reconciled, that they were complete, they were being corrected.
We were told that.
Yep. And I think that what we've looked at in our discussions as we get into the budget is some of the discussions that we've had have been centered around getting everything on that 30-day process portion, that you're asking people to trust their budgets and to look at what they're seeing on information that's well past 30 days, if not even. I think that the tendency here for a very long period of time was to make corrections either in the very last month or, God forbid, after that last month even. And so nobody can look at their budgets in a certain way. One of the issues that we've had the talk about recently, Mr. Dancer has been one that's been a proponent of that, is that we get to that point where everything falls within that 30 days. The reconciliations are done. Everything is there. It's not as simple, I know, as just saying we need the higher level personnel, because then it's the accountability portion of putting all of these things in place to do that.
Well, like I mentioned last night, I think one of the practices that we have to do is the checks and balance, where somebody does the general ledger, somebody checks it, the next morning somebody else checks it back. And I when you do audits, I kind of get nervous about, I hope that when there's a bad situation about the credit cards or whatever, that the particular people that turn those in are spoken to, and that it's not a broad, all of our departments are, I'm moving my hands and you guys can't see me, but it's not the whole, the whole city is doing it bad. It's like when you get that email that everybody needs to check that, but it's really the one person that's doing it or two people. I hope that the two, or how many ever people there are that are doing that incorrectly, are being spoken to directly, is how I would hope that was being approached, and not just a standard email or conversation in a meeting saying that all of you need to do this. If people have been doing it for several years, totally fine. And some people haven't been doing it for several years. The people that aren't doing it, I would ask that those be approached, please.
Michelle, if I can clarify that real simple. I did my own audit too of the credit card situation when this came up from Ally to me in February, March. 95% of the issue was one person.
Okay.
And it was dealt with in that manner.
Okay. That's just one of my,
no, and I would agree with you, because that is a problem.
Right, and then you're getting that email, so I just want to make sure that.
No, and the sad part is because I don't want to throw everybody else under that bus, because there were.
We have a lot of good people working in the city. We gotta make those people shine and take care of the ones that aren't shining so much.
There were 2 transactions total that didn't come from the one person.
Okay.
I mean, honestly, though, that's an act of fraud. So I agree with what Michelle's saying. As long as it's directly being addressed, I mean, we shouldn't be tolerating. I mean, that's stealing. So I mean, unless it's a one-time accident that, oops, I lost my receipt or whatever. But some of the things that she brought up, I mean, they sound like fraud to me, and I think that's really scary to be sitting in this, on this call or in this Zoom and listening to some of this. Especially for me, it's the first time I'm hearing any of it. It sounds like some of you addressed some of it last night. So I don't know. I hope it's being handled immediately and not, like Michelle said, a blanket email or a blanket statement or, I don't know.
I can't stress that enough, that those issues were.
Well, that's good news. Thank you.
And Matt, just to, I'm like your best, but there was no fraud uncovered.
No.
I mean, the purchases that were made,
Right.
even those that were not properly documented with the correct receipts, even those at least appeared to be legitimate. I mean, they were from there were transactions at reputable businesses.
Yeah, there was nothing of
Typical
that.
vendors that we do business with.
It was the idea of the policy that she spoke of in place, that if you didn't have one, you're to have an affidavit and have it signed, and that didn't happen. Those were the issues like that, but there was nothing uncovered that would have been in that respect.
Well, this was a very disappointing meeting.
Well,
So, but like I said, it's in the past. We better turn it around or we're going to start getting fined, I think.
So we have plenty of time and I'm available to anybody. Obviously, but I'd like to get into within a difficult portion too of going through building this at this particular time. But as you know, these are the general fund departments within the city that we have. And what I've done in projecting the revenues, expenses, and where our revenues come from: property taxes, special assessments, license and fees, permits, charges for services, fines, forfeits, grants. At the start of this process, when we all get together, I basically asked everybody here with what we're going through, was to tell me what you believe it just takes to run your department in a year. It's almost Roger, you mentioned the term zero-based budget, of saying, look, let's start July 1st. This is what we're looking at. As we went through that, when I've went through everybody in the general fund, our initial projected revenues for the city are a little over 4.2 million, and the expenditures are right in that same area. Ironically, it's very close to where we started off last year before in pre-COVID, the first initial numbers that we ran, that we came through. And so if you look at the revenues, these are the different areas of the 18-19 activity, the 19-20 activity, what was approved last year through the commission, and then where we've, what's been projected out for revenues this year. It appears that most of the state revenues and all that we were really concerned about last year, everything made its way back through the system. We are projecting that to stay healthy at least for another year. I think we're looking further down the road that we would have to start to question those things. This is all coming to you in the packet too, that these will all be in there for each and every one of the individual departments also. And then the appropriations going down through here. Again, giving you the totals within those departments. The treasurer is highlighted in red because that used to be its own department. That's all been taken into finance now. So that's why you'll see some different numbers across the base. Human resources will be the first time that it's actually budgeted in there. Engineering also now, our numbers coming into the general fund, as one of the big issues we had was with those internal service fees, of how we were working our way through all of those. And so these are the numbers that you'll have there, and I have every department line by line that I will send you out in the packet. to get here.
Matt, go back up 1 second for a minute. Just maybe it's a mistake. It grabs me right on the top because it's right on the top. City commission for 1920, 10 times what every other one has been, or is that a mistake?
No, that is that 250,000 that was put into, for the MERS payment. And so there's an explanation as to where that was.
Okay.
But we
All right,
just
thank you. I just thought maybe that was a mistake because it's way out of whack. So
to say as to where it has to go, from there, but that's where that one ended up at a point.
thank you.
The restricted funds then are those different areas, that we know that have specific monies coming in, things for them that are actually how they're funded. I will say that we have talked about when we bring it to you that we'd like we're going to look at a 3% increase in both water and wastewater, necessary to keep us ahead of that curve as to where we're at going forward. And looking from them, the numbers that we are looking at in those restricted funds that are the most talked about that we have, with the library, the transit services, that is a significant difference because of the pickup of the other areas, plus the pickup of those other monies coming in. And then the refuse collection, which is the other one that we tend to be most involved in with our personnel. One of the challenges that I think we weren't very good at in the past that I'm trying to tackle right now, is really that answer of where do we take these places that have been under internal service fees and how do you move those? What I did to get to the salaries is looking at taking a total appropriation of what we would have basically like in public works, about 925,000 in salaries and fringe, and then looking at where do we get the funding from that comes from another source, not general fund funding. And so I broke those out to see where we're paying for that, and then we're having to move that other portion into general fund in order to make sure that we're covering that 925,000 for them. And so that came out through this period that I'm looking at there. So some of the other changes that we're looking at that will come through is the American Rescue Plan and the opportunities to move forward and the infrastructure bill that's coming out. I think the challenge that we have as the organization is to maximize those dollars to the best that we can. Still waiting on the final guidance, as I mentioned to you before, about the rescue plan, so that we know exactly what that can be spent on. But starting that planning process that says if we're going to spend it here, how do we best push those dollars out further down the road? And if it means not being able to get to the top of the road, but we can spend enough on the underneath, then we need to make sure that we're making the right plans for that. $877,000 sounds like it will be a lot. As we've talked about, costs are skyrocketing. So the sooner we start to put those in place, and I think that needs to be part of our discussion even before we finalize the budget here as we get to May. And then the infrastructure bill is really going to have a lot to do with these things. Some of that will be earmarked specifically for things, specifically for items. That may be where we have the opportunity to get back to some of those areas of the parking lots and some of those other things. Just don't want to see us duplicating any of our efforts of where we find later we could have actually used the money from one of these other plans in that portion of time. So moving from there, I will have these. I already have all the backup to those sheets that will give you all of the full line by line item for these departments. And then our next review session will take place on the 11th, but I'm thinking we might want to do one on the 4th and publish that out so we can have a full blown talk on the whole thing. And then getting CIPs out as we work through our way through water and wastewater and those major CIP programs from there. I think, Michelle, you said it best. This wasn't a pleasant meeting. And so I've kind of just went through this process. I think we have more important things that we need to make sure that we're continuing to work forward on this, all of us together.
So Matt, is there something that the commissioners can do to help with this?
I think we need to start formulating some of the ideas. One of my concerns, and I'm open to anybody's discussion on this, is I have concerns when you're going to see these large influx of money to go, and yet we've got multiple different areas that could be coming in. And I think if we need to really work on putting a plan together that says, what are those things that fit those needs? We talked about lead and copper all the time, but I think there's going to be money specifically coming through the infrastructure plan for lead and copper. So we want to make sure we're not already making plans to take some of the money that may be available through the American Rescue Plan to do something like that. So I think those types of things, Michelle, if we could figure out and see how do we prioritize, start thinking of what are those priority areas that we could start to fill in for all of these different potential funding sources, and how do we best utilize it to maximize those dollars? Because I think that's where your input can be so helpful to all of us.
Can you come up with that? You may have a plan and then a plan B right alongside it. So
I think so.
What do we shift? If we get money for this, where does this go? Where does this earmark go?
Yeah, I think if we go back and look at what we've prioritized over the past, we know we've talked about the downtown parking lots are an essential thing for us going forward. We know that we have some infrastructure when we start talking about the sewers and the water mains that need to be there. And I think laying that all out so that we do actually say, look, this chunk of money needs to go here, this here, and as different sources maybe come in, we're ready. Talking to some of the engineering companies, you have two different trains of thoughts. When you talk to economic development people, or you're in an MLO conference with some people from economic development, they're all about, you need to get your engineers right now. You need to be going. You have to plan all this. And then you talk to Treasury, and Treasury saying, look, you don't know what the guidelines are going to be. Don't lock yourself into something yet. But I think what you're saying there, Nick, the idea is to have multiple things that say, if this happens, this, if that happens, then this would be the way to go.
It's going to be very difficult to have pre-planning in place before they write the rules of the game for us. I mean, that's, they've been arguing down in Lansing on a pile of money, and, there's a possibility the state may lose all that money because they can't come to an agreement.
In agreement with it.
That's a very real possibility.
Last indication I had was that the guidelines for the rescue plan should be out by the 27th of this month. Actually, because they have to be out by that date. I don't know what happens if they're not, because it's the federal money. Well, they're going to pull it all back, but it's the U.S. Treasury that has to make those guidelines and then come to the state.
And the sad thing, Matt, you and I have talked. I've talked with some others individually too. That just as you've seen the price of a sheet of plywood go from $30 to $90. They're throwing all this money out here all at once, and everybody's going to be spending it all at once. That means the price of an engineer is going to go from, $200 an hour to $600 an hour, and we're not going to get any more work done. We're all going to pay a whole lot more money for it. It's, frustrating and sad, and, we've gone all these years without being able to do many projects because there's no money, and now there appears to be so much money coming that all it's going to do is drive up the prices. Because there isn't manpower, there isn't materials and equipment available to do all that stuff, to absorb all that kind of money. It's very frustrating, and we don't have the staff to engineer 5 different projects at one time, and neither does Rowe or any of the other firms. The people just aren't there.
Well, and I think it was Kathy Rosen I was speaking with, and I agree with what she had heard, is that realistically, even within the engineering firms, they're stealing from each other constantly because they know they all need more engineers with all the work that's coming, but they're taking somebody and hiring them from one firm, and then that firm's hiring somebody from them on the other hand. So they're not making any gains either. So we're not seeing a large influx of more and more
but
people.
The engineers are all winding up with better salaries.
Yes. And it's boosting all of that.
Yeah, I mean, you see the same thing, McDonald's puts a sign out for $12 an hour, Subway puts one out for $14, and, they're just hiring each other's help back and forth. It's going on all over the place.
So I'm hopeful when those guidelines come out, at least we'll have a better idea of what we can do It seems rather specific right now, at least with the rescue plan. The infrastructure plan still has to work its way, as a bill through, but that seems to have more availability for things that we'll be able to do, more types of projects, but you won't know that either until that's finalized.
Make plans when you go with the rules.
Yes. So.
If we could go back a couple slides back, you did have a number up for the transit budget.
Yep.
Is that based on what millage? Is there any reduction in millage coming for our taxpayers because of all this?
Not at this point, not until we've went through this first start of the process. This is all of the agencies, or all of the Slipper and the city of Alma being in the same, at the same millage rate.
That's extremely disappointing.
From there. We've had that discussion. I understand that.
Did you have anything else, Matt, that you wanted to add for tonight?
I'm good there. I think we've had quite the night. And again, I'm available. If anybody has any more questions as to where we're at, we have a long haul in front of us and continue to work there. And
If you could give us for me personally, I would like monthly updates where we're doing,
sure. Yep.
how we're doing, what our plan is, what's happening, what's not going well, what's going well, please, because
Yep.
I don't want to be sitting here next year feeling
Nope.
how we're all feeling right now.
Right now. I agree.
Ed, you mentioned the possibility of another meeting on May the 4th. We'd have a regular commission meeting next week, and then a week off, and then commission meeting on the 11th, and the special on the 18th, and the final on the 25th. Do you think we ought to schedule a May 4th meeting to go through?
I do. I think there's enough, Raj, to go through that I think it would be important to have it on the 4th. That's generally how we've done it.
I hate to break in here, but May 4th is election day.
Oh, that's right.
Sarah's
You
like,
know?
no.
Just
We
so
can
you
actually
know.
go on the
I mean, it's
5th, which is
possible.
Thank you, Sarah.
That we're not stuck on Tuesdays. We could do it on May 5th, which would be a Wednesday.
Okay, we'll look at dates and find out. We'll decide that for sure
Okay.
next week then.
I'll send that out. I'll send you just out that so we can make sure that we know that.
And that would be Cinco de Mayo, so we can do it with margaritas, and maybe that'll help.
That would be Cinco de Mayo.
Matt, I'm just sorry about all of this. And is there something that we should be doing to be helping? I mean, I don't.
No,
Nick was very eloquent in what he said, and I really appreciate what he has to say and his input, because I feel, being part of the finance committee, like we have failed miserably, and I don't know how to help. And because I am limited, and I do, when people sound like they know what they're talking about, I like to believe that people we have trusted and hired as adults are telling us the right information. So I don't know what to do. But if there's something we can do, I hope that you know I'm willing to
We're at this point that this isn't a rebuild. We're not rebuilding. It's a complete restructure that has to happen. This isn't a retool, I guess was the wrong word. When we meant this isn't a retool. It is a rebuild. I said that wrong. I apologize. It is a complete rebuild. I don't want it to be a reflection too on the entire organization. Michelle, you have a very valid point when you said that, because it isn't. There are some really good people, and there are some really good people in finance. I'm not saying that. I think that it's just time to say that a modern finance department, the very first thing about internal controls, and I've been the one who keeps saying I'm not going to go to the past, but that's a 7 year in a row. That's 7 years in a row about the internal controls and the structure of the department. And so
But we went 2 years, the bad audit.
Yeah.
So now we're part of the problem.
exactly. And so that's the issue. That's where it's at. You either make a decision, and it's hard right now, I know, to sit here and be positive about, but it is time. It is that time just to make those changes that are absolutely completely necessary and put people in the right positions to do the jobs that are necessary right now.
Roxanne, don't beat yourself up for that, because we all fell into that hole.
Well, I'm sitting here right here. There's nobody more responsible than me. And that's extremely difficult to swallow.
And it's not just you, Matt. I mean, we've actually, we've had these reports, we've acted on them. It's not like we knew there was problems, didn't take any action. How many finance directors have we gone through in the last 5 years? We've changed personnel. You got to give people time. We've given people time, put them in the roles, thinking they had the right skill set, and there was multiple people, processes went through, that they seemed qualified, and they apparently weren't, and they, painted rosy pictures for us for a while, and we, allowed that to happen because you have to for a while. And, when it was time to perform, they didn't, and it became apparent, and we've taken action multiple times. It is very frustrating to have that many different personnel changes and not have found someone that's competent.
I think what the situation here is that as we have started out with this, the leadership has to come from the top, and the buck, kiddies, stops here. It's with us. We have not had the policies in place. We have not had the procedures in place to make sure that we knew what was going on with the people that we were hiring to do that. And it's time it starts right at the top, and that we put those actions in place to ensure that the right people are being hired, and that when we do hire people, they know exactly what the job that we have asked them to do is.
Well, another town you heard from, but Matt, for me, I'm I keep thinking, I thought I'd never say these words, but I'm kind of in a trust but verify mode. Mm-hmm. What would be a process that helps us do that? Sort of to Michelle's point, I think probably rather than an in-depth monthly report, probably what are those 5 or 6 initiatives, and then buy them a red, yellow, or green light. And then if it's a red light, tell us what it is that's troubling you. But I also don't want to have you spend all your time writing reports for us. I mean, it's an awful lot to do. I just want to know if things aren't going the way you want. I want to know where the issues are, but I think
I think that some of us have worked on budgets and do have finance that are on the commission, and we need to lend our experience for our community members to get this back on track as soon as we can. And so if that takes time for the ones of us that know finance and budgets and checks and balances, and we can come in and give guidance and help, then I'm willing to do that, because we just got to get it under control. Like, we all agree. I'm not saying that none of us agree on that, and it needed to come out that way.
No, I think you're right. We all agree, and it has to. It has to be now. That's the bottom line.
Well, I think we are ready to move on to our next phase of our meeting then. We've got commissioner comments. Not that we all haven't said a bit already, but Matt.
In the personnel meeting last night, I did warn Curtis that I've been known to voice my opinion. So I don't sit quiet.
That is the role that we all have, is to voice our opinions.
Right. I was just saying in our meeting last night, I kept saying, "Oh, Curtis, this," or asking questions. So I told him that meeting him, I was telling him about me personally.
So, commissioner comments. Michelle, would you like to go ahead and finish then? You started with some comments, so why don't you?
I think you've all heard my voice enough tonight. So, I do want to make a side note that today there was notice that our beloved pizza maker down at Pizza Sam's, Fidel, is that how he pronounces his name? He passed away, and it looks like it's from COVID, from his GoFundMe page. So our little town lost a good spirit there. He was always smiling, waving to no matter where he was in town. So my thoughts are with his family. That's all.
Roger. Would you like to go next, please?
I couldn't hear you. Did you say Audra or Roger?
I said Roger, but
Okay.
I'll defer to you, Audra. I think I've said all the needs that I can say tonight. We need to move on this, and we will.
I'll pass.
Audra,
I'm going to pass on commenting tonight too. Thank you.
we'll circle back to you then for later too. Danny,
I'd just like to say, first off, thanks to Matt for kind of spearheading this, and it's not always an easy conversation. It's not fun to talk about ever. But I think kind of what we're all getting along and all saying is that we just need to get it fixed. And I think that starts with us and then with you kind of, like I said, spearheading this thing like you have been. And I appreciate your work and everything you've done, Matt. Thank you.
well said, Danny. Roxanne,
Oh, I guess I'm not muted. Sorry. Yeah, I agree with Danny 100%. Matt, I appreciate the work you put into it, and this is not an easy task. And if there's, as I've said, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. And we believe in you. We've got we'll figure this out. Thanks.
Nick.
Really? Now I'm unmuted.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, good. Nothing really to add. I think everyone has said it well.
Okay. Sarah, did you have any comments?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else from you, Matt?
No, I've said my piece tonight too. I think it's just a lot of hard work come out. So.
Yeah, it's been a disappointing night, a frustrating night, and I'm afraid we've got a few more of these ahead of us, but we will get through it. We've got a good team. There are a lot of good people working at the city for the city, and I'm convinced there's good people on this commission, and we will get through this. It's just going to take time, but we will do it. So with that, I'd open it up to the public. Are there any members of Okay. If they haven't by now, we'll presume that they will not. So with that, we'd entertain a motion for adjourn.
So moved.
Support.
I have a motion and support. All those in favor, give me a thumbs up.